Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next comment or question comes from XP50 Player. In response to TR8 saving patterns, Fantom has lost most of the Jupiter tones. Mailbag I did in May 2023. XP50 writes, I later heard back from one of the Roland guys that although the Fantoms contain much of the JP SN synth toned content in some form, the differences between the keyboards are too great to convincingly reproduce the JP80 live sets. Actually, that's JP Jupiter live sets. This is really interesting, a very interesting comment actually. The previous commentary seems to imply this would simply be a simple, would be possible, and it would be fairly simple. And not having the unit myself, I'm not able to verify one way or the other whether it can or cannot work. Now I guess that you can combine tones into patches with layers and effects applied through the workstation controls, but not in the same format as the Jupiter live set or Jupiter's live set configuration. But other than that, I can't really comment any further, but it's really interesting that somebody has said that. Next comment or question comes from Mountain. In response to the JX-3P Part 2 Getting Inside video, a video I did about restoring Gary Robinson of the Death Beats JX-3P. And he writes, I love your videos, thanks. Well, thank you for the feedback. I need to swap the transformer for a new one I've just bought. The original is buzzing loudly. Is it dangerous to swap them? Any advice would be appreciated. Cheers. Well, I'm going to caveat this answer that says it's dangerous. It's dangerous on the fact that you are dealing with mains electricity in the region of the world you live in. So that's ranging from 240 volts where I live in the UK to 100 volts out in the Far East, and various voltages in between. But there's always a danger when you're dealing with mains voltages, so you just need to be aware of that. You know, yes, mains voltage is dangerous, but if you take some very clear precautions, then it's not as dangerous as it could be. So first thing is, make sure when you plug something into a main supply, you make sure you've got some sort of trip mechanism between you and the fuse box, so that if you do happen to do something rather stupid like ground it to yourself, you'll get a bolt but you won't get a lethal shock with a bit of luck, assuming that the trip device is doing its work. Hence the reason why quite often you see me working on my bench here. Now all the sockets round on my bench supply are actually on a trip, so if something goes wrong here, the power will just trip out, and yes, it will be a bit uncomfortable, but theoretically I won't get this is 30 amps, I won't get 30 amps going through me to ground, which would almost definitely probably kill me. So that's the first thing I would say, you know, make sure that's the first thing. Now, if you're replacing the transformer with a like-for-like replacement, then it's probably a pretty easy thing to do. It's a fairly easy piece of unsoldering. You might have to unbolt the transformer from something or other, but literally it's probably unsoldering the wires, taking the transformer out, putting the new transformer in, and then soldering the wires back in, or the connection points back in, depending on how it's connected to the rails. It's not too big a job, to be honest. And to be honest, if you actually have, if the transformer is mounted to a board and you manage to buy the whole board, that's easier because it's literally undo the connection clips between the board and wherever, undo the bolts, out comes the board, new board goes in, reconnect all the clips, maybe a little bit of soldering for things like the mains wires that come in and solder to tags on the board somewhere. But in general, the general concept is that's a really easy thing. It's just swap one in, one out. Now, if you're not putting like for like in, you need to ensure that the control the voltages are the same. Now, typically, what you want to do is, if your transformer is still working, you want to make a note of what voltage you're getting off the transformer on the relevant pins. You can get those details from a lot of the service manuals if you can find the service manual. Now, I know for some of this legacy text, finding the service manual is a bit difficult. Some manufacturers are really helpful because they actually write the voltages against the pins on the board, so that helps you. But typically what you're looking at when you look at a board of any electronic circuit is most electronic circuits work at plus or minus 5 volts. Okay, so you probably will have a fairly low voltage of a 0 volts, a plus 5, a minus 5. If you've got some sort of amplification going on in a synthesizer, for argument's sake, that needs a slightly higher voltage, and that will typically work off something like plus 12 or plus 15 volts. You might have a plus 12, minus 12, plus 15, minus 15, but there's normally a voltage range. The other thing is, if you're running third-party peripherals like a disk drive, there may be a separate set of power tappings for that, and they probably maybe plus 12 and 0. I'm not 100% sure because it depends on what the peripheral is, to be honest. But that kind of is, if you're looking with some of this legacy tech, that's kind of what you expect to find. So if you're going to put a non-like PSU in, like a modern switched PSU, then you've got to make sure that you're actually pumping out the same voltages. Now, a lot of these replacement PSUs that are coming onto market now are properly Faraday caged, so they typically will come in a metal cage. You need to make sure that's properly earthed, so wherever you put it in there, if you've got an earthing cable, you need to make sure that earthing cable runs to that cage, which it theoretically should do, because if the power supply has been designed properly anyway, it will take all three wires, the live, the neutral and the earth, and it will earth itself, but there's no harm in being doubly careful on that sort of stuff. And then it will have multiple outputs on the transformer itself, and you need to make sure those outputs match the voltage. Now, a lot of them do. A lot of them are plus or minus 5 volts, 0 volts, plus or minus 12 volts, depending on what you bought. But you just need to bear that in mind. I've been lucky so far. I haven't had to put many of those sort of supplies into a keyboard. In fact, I don't think any of my keyboards do. But I know I did a repair for a friend quite some time ago, where I bought a new generic power supply from a company in the Netherlands that was making them, and that worked out pretty well. The only thing we had to do is we had to get a new bracket made up, because the mounting holes of the power supply and the mounting holes of the power board that it was replacing, of course, were in completely different places. So we had to get a bracket made up that allowed us to screw to the mounting points on the original for the original power board, and then we could then mount the new power supply on those to make sure that it was in the right place and it didn't move around inside the chassis. I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube where people have just stuck stuff in. That's not the way to go, but you know, horses for courses.